The Union in Crisis, Chapter 3, Section 1. I will not read all of this to you. If you need to pause it, you may. You will be quizzed over anything read or said. (1846) slave states versus free states. Compromise of 1850.
Josiah Henson's story is a remarkable tale of a man who escaped the brutal bonds of slavery. He built a settlement for fugitive slaves and a school where their children could receive a proper education. His memoirs were a key inspiration for Uncle Tom's Cabin, the best-selling novel of the 19th century, which Abraham Lincoln credited with starting the Civil War. Josiah Henson's efforts on behalf of the Underground Railroad helped more than 100 slaves escape to freedom. He was received as an honored guest by the President of the United States, and he even traveled to England and met the Queen twice. But I'm getting ahead of the story. Josiah Henson was born June 15th, 1789, in Charles County, Maryland, about a mile from Port Tobacco. As Negroes of African ancestry, Josiah's mother and father were property of local farmers. Yes, Josiah's parents were slaves, and so was Josiah. One day, while working in the fields on his master's farm, Josiah's father heard a woman screaming. He arrived on the scene to find the white overseer attacking his wife. Josiah's father would have killed the overseer except for his wife's pleadings, and the overseer's promise that nothing would ever be said of the matter. But the overseer had lied.
You know, when he was really young, I think 3 or 4 years of age, he saw his father being brought to the center of the plantation and put on display, and his punishment for having touched a white person, because in those days it was illegal for a black to touch a white person. His father's punishment was that he was lashed 100 times, and then his right ear was tacked to a post and then cut off with a knife. And just imagine having to witness that at such a young age. And his father was put up on an auction block and sold down to Alabama because he was seen as somewhat of a troublemaker on the plantation.
Young Josiah's troubles were just beginning. For only a year or so after his father was sold, his master was killed in an accident. In a drunken stupor, he fell from his horse into a shallow creek and was too drunk to save himself. And as a result of his death, it became necessary to sell the estate and the slaves. As was common in those days, Josiah's entire family was put on the auction block and sold to the highest bidder.
The first image I think of when I think of Henson, I think of him being up on the auction block and being sold away from his brothers and sisters and his mother and dad, and how heart-wrenching that must have been. He was sold away from most of his family. His mother pleaded and pleaded with the man who purchased him to buy her as well, but he was separated from his mother and became ill under his new master, and the masters had some foresight in knowing that a boy would get stronger if he had the love of his mother with him. And so he was sold back with his mother, and under her tutelage, he really got better, and he was really helped to build his strong character that he had throughout his life.
Slaves were supplied with the barest minimum of food and clothing. They lived in single-room huts with only packed dirt for a floor, and 10 or 12 adults and children would crowd into each hut to sleep. The huts provided little protection from the dampness and cold, and they did not permit the common decencies of life.
In 1857, a case that would turn the tide of American history came before the court. It was named after a Missouri slave, Dred Scott. It was to pull the court into the smoldering conflict between North and South. Dred Scott, who belonged to a U.S. Army officer, appealed to the court to declare him a free man. He had followed his master from the slave state of Missouri to the free state of Illinois and the Wisconsin Territory and back again. When his master died, Scott claimed he was no longer a slave since he had lived on free soil. Chief Justice Roger Taney presided over what has been called the worst decision ever made by the Supreme Court. The justices sent Dred Scott back into slavery. The ruling cemented the Southern conviction that slaves were property, not people, and hastened the onset of the Civil War. Many citizens, including Abraham Lincoln, who would soon be elected president, vehemently disagreed with the decision, and the court plummeted in public prestige.
You can see from this picture that Lincoln is about a foot taller than Stephen Douglas. Stephen Douglas, not wanting to appear so much shorter, would actually jump up on a chair or a block of wood to appear equal to Lincoln in stature. And that's where we get the term stump jumper, because he would jump up on something to be taller. There's the Liberator, William Lloyd Garrison's newspaper. John Brown was charged with treason, but here they're praying for him.